welcome here to a very special edition of Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. When I say very special edition, it's just my way of saying that I don't know how to be off the air. That's just how it is. So, I mean, we do Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern time. We always go over and go past 11 a.m. And now I'm here on a Saturday, July 1st. And this is what we do, airing these specials. So, it's an opportunity today to make history on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora with something we've released here. Also to make history with Lemoyne officially joining Division I and going to the NEC. And now here with the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, Mike Aresco, as he has 3 schools leave, 6 schools join. They will have their most membership in the American Athletic Conference overall, with 15 schools represented in some way, shape, or form. We have we have 13 full member institutions, Wichita State, everything but football, Navy football only. And so 15 altogether, 14 football members, largest ever on the football side of things. And on top of that, we bid adieu to 3 wonderful institutions that are joining the Big 12 now in Houston, UCF, and Cincinnati. And there's just so much over this time. Of course, Mike Aresco, knowing my birthday being October 21st, did that on purpose when these schools were announced on October 21st, 2021, the 21 on 21. I want to thank him for, because it was a happy accident, I guess. But with that being said, I bring in my commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, commissioner, good friend, and somebody who I've spent at least over a decade at this point with. So, Mike, how are you?
Hey, great to be with you, Dan. And it's hard to believe it's been a decade. Seems like it was a different life 10 years ago with the conference. And I remember meeting you at one of our meetings in Newport when we first were getting started. And unlike a lot of people, you weren't skeptical about our chances, thought we could be a pretty good conference. And not many people thought that, but you were proven right. And we've had a great decade, as you know. But it's going to be a challenge going forward. But it's exciting. It's like anything else, a change, but renewal as well. I think President Kennedy once said that in an inaugural address. It's time of change and renewal, and that's exactly what it is here. So we'll see what happens.
Change is inevitable, right? And it's not that it's not going to happen. It's just how you're going to respond to change when it does happen. So we know that with it being inevitable, we are in a world where we have to say a heartfelt see you later to Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. They've been a massive part of this conference. Houston had the first success in football, followed by UCF, followed by Cincinnati, which obviously helped their resume in any other league looking at them. And we look at also what UCF has had in moments in basketball, obviously Cincinnati's moments, Houston being as great as they've been in basketball with Kelvin Sampson. And then, onward from there, when we look at other sports and other pieces of what they've done and the leadership, the coaches, the student athletes, the players that have advanced and are now playing professionally. Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF, none of them slouches. They all came in with not a lot of notoriety. They leave the American Athletic Conference as 3 of the most successful programs that we have ever seen in the American, and 3 of the most enticing institutions of any conference in realignment to look at. And I think people will be crazy to think that only the Big 12 looked at them. So as we see them later, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's no question, that it's bittersweet when you have a moment like this. We're really thrilled with the new schools. I think they're going to be tremendous additions to our conference. But, I would, my feeling toward the departing schools is I thank them and I congratulate them for what they did for the conference and what they did for themselves. And I wish them a lot of success in the new conference. I think they'll do very well there. But remember, their achievements, Dan, will be a lasting legacy for the American. They did it here. They did it in the American. And we'll be rooting for them in their new home, except when we compete against them, which we will do from time to time. But I think they'll be rooting for the continued success of our conference. Kelvin Sampson has been just wonderful, and he has communicated with me and just, wishes us well. And we think he's been one of the great supporters of our conference, and so is Luke Fickle and others. and they helped build this strong foundation. And we part in friendship. You know, we have never tried to make this personal. It's not personal. And we understand the situation with realignment. We would love to have had them stay, but we understand, you know, why they're doing what they're doing. Now, remember, you're right. You know, they were probably in the sights of a lot of conferences, right? But there's something to remember, and this is not in any way, and this is why I have to emphasize this, it's not to denigrate them at all. But the incumbent schools that are remaining are continuing members, had significant success alongside the ones that are leaving. Now, Houston, you know, they're a great program. They've got some great potential. But Dan, they won our conference championship once in 10 years. Once. Tulane's won it. Temple has won it. Memphis has won it, right? Yeah. Cincinnati had very little success in the early years in our conference in football, and then hired Luke Fickell and had great success. And we applaud that. We applaud what they did. They performed a virtual miracle in making the playoff, right? That's a hard thing to do. Everything had to fall in place, and they earned it. And they did it in our conference. And they did it because our conference was good enough so that their strength of schedule wasn't held against them. Although that's been an issue for us over the years. UCF, I thought, was a worthy playoff team. UCF has not won our championship since 2018. Look who's won it since then. Memphis, Tulane, you know, Cincinnati a couple of times. And Tulsa was in one of those championship games, right? Navy played in the championship game against Temple. Navy played Houston in a game that decided the Western Division back in 2015. So USF had some great years, remember, when they played one of the greatest football games ever played against UCF. That was one of the greatest college games I've ever seen, and I've seen some great ones over the years. So here we are, you know, we know that those three schools devoted resources, made a commitment, did a lot for our conference. Yeah. But incumbents who are still in our conference, continuing members, did a lot as well. And we're getting 6 new schools that have a lot of energy, and they're bringing a lot of excitement. And they, to be honest, they've achieved more than we thought they would in the interim period before they came into the conference, in football and in basketball. So that's a net positive for us, without question.
Yeah, you know, and you bring it up, Mike, and I mean, it is hard, and it is bittersweet, right, to say goodbye to the schools that you have to say goodbye to, but at the same time to see the excitement of this. I mean, realignment comes with its departures and it comes with its arrivals. Essentially, realignment is like one giant airport, because planes are taking off and landing all the time. And the ones that are going to be landing inside of the American Athletic Conference are Rice University, UTSA, as well as UAB. We will see UNC Charlotte, North Texas, and FAU. All of these schools bringing their own uniqueness to them. Rice University, speaking with Joe Carlgard about that, and what Rice, you know, Rice's look in and of itself, and they've had some success in men's basketball recently, but their look is so unique, and their placement in Houston and the backdrop, and how they essentially have this castle kind of Hogwarts look to them. UNC Charlotte being right there in the heart of one of the growing cities where many things are happening in Charlotte, to UTSA that has tremendous success and has done some wonderful things under the leadership of Lisa Campos, to North Texas, who is under new leadership in their athletic department and having their success in recent history, beating Texas in the men's NCAA Division I tournament within the last few years. And then we look at FAU and making their historic run in men's basketball in this past NCAA tournament to make it as far as they made it, to, you know, achieve their victory in the tournament, to get to the round of 32, to first ever Sweet 16, first Elite 8, first Final Four, and almost made it to the championship game. So we see all of these elements and pieces. Then we look at UAB, who had gotten rid of their football program, and a couple of years later bring it back, and they've become bowl eligible since the moment of the reinstitution of their football program. So every single team that you're getting, every school that you're getting, every portion of this realignment is as much as it's bittersweet to see the schools going, this may be arguably the most exciting time for the American Athletic Conference because you've never been bigger, you've never been more diverse, and you've never had schools in certain areas, in certain states, and in certain cities like you will right now.
No question, Dan, and you've described, I think, the schools extremely well. We're bringing in a lot of schools that bring a lot of many things to the conference. They are terrific schools. They are investing. They have a pedigree in certain areas. They have a list of achievements that they can cite. And I've been talking about them with some of their local writers, this morning. Interestingly, Dan, you mentioned realignment at the outset, and the the volatility of it, and the fact that change is pretty much a constant. It's interesting. I don't want to get too philosophical here, but if college sports ran itself like the NFL, which is sort of a socialism within, but capitalism without, right? You probably wouldn't have as much movement among schools. I grew up in that era, and you remember it, of regional conferences, smaller regional conferences that had rivalries and had distinct flavor because of their regionality. And that's changed. You're seeing consolidation. Maybe that's a fact of life. Walmarts are replacing, the mom and pop stores, but you're seeing that. But when you had the old CFA, there was a lot more equality all around, right? And you did one giant, TV deal, and then people, shared the proceeds. And I think there wasn't that need to one up everyone in terms of revenue, and therefore that started the parade of realignment, as you know. And so you ended up with schools together that may not necessarily have had much in common, didn't have a lot of geographical, geography in common. So anyway, it's an interesting dynamic. Here you have a group of conferences are just all in competition with each other, all trying to get that last dollar, and that's what's caused so much of this movement. And to be honest with you, while we celebrate the schools coming in, and we wish the schools leaving well, none of us really likes realignment. We're involved in it. I don't even think the ones at the top necessarily like it. I didn't like having to take schools from Conference USA. It's a great group, and Judy McLeod's a terrific friend, and it's hard to do that. And yet we hated losing schools as well. And a lot of it is the revenue. The revenue. Now, there is a regionality aspect to this, Dan. Interesting, ironically. Yeah. When you really think about it, Houston wanted to be back with more schools from its region, right? And our conference didn't have as much of that for them. But on the other hand, if our revenue were similar to the P5, and I think we earned a revenue, but that's not the nature. You don't get what you deserve. You get what you're able to negotiate, right? And so consequently, we don't have the kind of revenue they have. We have a lucrative TV deal relative to who we are. It helps us compete. But we didn't have the kind of revenue the others had. And that meant that, some were going to leave regardless. We're comfortable in our conference, like being in our conference. Our conference came about because of realignment. Therefore, geographically, we were a little disparate. But, we probably have more of a geographical cohesion now than a lot of conferences do. I mean, the Big Ten stretches all the way from the east to the Pacific, right? The Big 12 is all over the place. Florida, Ohio, all over. BYU out in Utah. So things have changed dramatically, and you just have to accept that it's a new world. I applaud our continuing schools, our incumbent schools, for the outstanding achievements of their student athletes, and our league's been replete with great achievements, and our players never flinched. We never shied away from the challenge. We embraced it. I think you mentioned the new schools, and you talked about the new schools, and I think they'll embrace that challenge. That's the key. If without them doing that, I don't think this conference would have a bright future. It does, though. And you said it. We're bigger than we've been. I think there's strength in numbers. I think it's going to be a very competitive conference. I'll continue to give voice to the achievements if we have them, and I think we will. So we'll see. I'm very excited, though, and the new schools do bring a lot a lot of football and basketball credibility. They also have won a lot of Olympic sports championships in Conference USA. So we'll see what happens.
And and when you look at this, speaking here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora in this special as we honor July 1st, 2023 as the day that we officially see 15 members inside of the American Athletic Conference, and Navy for football only, Wichita State for everything but football, and 13 fully in football and everything else members. Looking at this and what this is going to be for the American Athletic Conference. For you, Mike, I mean, to be here on this day, there was a couple of years ago where there was this flirtation of the Big 12 potentially coming to take some schools from the American Athletic Conference, and it didn't happen. And then we see that it does happen this time around. When you are trying to navigate the plan, you've always been very candid with me about this and a peek behind the curtain. Going into this process for you, when you're looking at schools in the FBS level, maybe some FCS level schools, when you're looking around the country, how do you kind of dissect and find the right fit pieces? Because you end up with 6 from Conference USA. But were you looking all over the country, and how does your team kind of go through this with a fine-tooth comb, so to speak, before you made the decision on the 6 schools that you made the decision on and they accepted? What was the process like?
Well, that's a great question, Dan. An absolutely relevant, pertinent question. And it may come up again, right?
Yeah.
If there's more realignment down the road. First of all, we typically do not contact schools. They contact us, and many schools from various conferences contacted us, and we try to keep that confidential. We try to protect their confidentiality. It's really important. You've seen less of that lately, right? Unfortunately, you've seen a lot of talking about different schools, and probably not necessarily a healthy thing. But we looked at what I guess you could term metrics. We looked at a lot of different aspects of a school. For example, we would look at what their competitive success has been, especially in football. And I can't say anything different. Football drives it, Dan. Football drives it, and we know that. And you have to understand that. But basketball's important, and Olympic sports mean a lot to us. But that's not what drives realignment. So we look at their football success. We look at their football investment. We look at their football commitment. We look at whether they've been willing to hire good coaches, whether we think they'll be able to succeed at that level in our, at the level necessary in our conference. Because as you know, 8 out of 10 New Year's days, right? Making the playoff, being playoff competitive for many, many years. This conference has been a football powerhouse. So we want to make sure teams can compete. We look at size of stadium. We look at the size of their market. We look at their market. How attractive is it? Is it geographically a fit for us? We're not necessarily looking for someone from Washington State or from New England. The point is we know who we are, and we have to find a cultural fit. We want schools that make sense and that would fit culturally with us. We also look to their leadership. Do they have the kind of leadership that's going to invest, that's going to make the commitment, or are they going to shy away from it? And when we did all those things, we identified, probably 8 or 10 schools that made some sense.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Dan. That made some sense, and we focused on ultimately these 6, because one, they're all in major markets for the most part. They all are willing to invest. They all have had some football success and have good football pedigree. We also now find that they have tremendous basketball pedigree too, and have done really well in basketball, and that's great. We think that's a terrific addition to our conference. It means a lot. But in looking at them, they're in important markets, and 2 things are going to determine, I think, our success in football in the coming years, Dan. One is, are we in good recruiting areas? Are we where the players are, and are we in, do we have schools where they want to go? Because one, they want to be in the region, their families are here, and the demographics favor us in the Southwest and Southeast these days. That's predominantly where we are, but we're also in Pennsylvania, which is a hotbed of football. And we're in East Carolina, where, you know, you have an SEC type atmosphere and have had it for years. And now they've resurrected the program. Mike Houston's done a great job there. But we look at that and say, okay, this is going to help us recruit. Second, the transfer portals become critical to college football. And as you know, and you've talked about it, transfers often want to go back to their home area, right, where they came from, and play at schools where, you know, they're comfortable, and their families can watch them and their friends. And so we are in places where that's how Sonny Dykes, built SMU. He brought transfers back who were from the Texas area who wanted to come home. Yeah. There was a running back at USF once who went out to UCLA years ago, came back because he got homesick and wanted to play in Florida. He came back to USF and was a star. And so you have a dynamic there that's really important. And I think we pick schools in the right regions, in the right markets. We wanted to fortify Texas because Texas is really a fulcrum of our conference. We've got 4 schools in Texas. Texas is a huge football state and a huge recruiting area, and one of the fastest growing states in the country. The whole region where we're in, UAB, Charlotte, FAU, Rice, Texas, North Texas, and SMU, the state of Texas. These are the fastest growing regions in the country. And, in the meantime, we've got a strong presence with Navy and Temple in Philadelphia, Navy in Baltimore, Washington. And as I said, East Carolina has always had their own specific football culture in a state that has been better known for basketball, but they have a tremendous football program. So those are the kinds of things we looked at. Yeah. And we said, okay, what about their administrators? And I knew a lot of them. I knew Mike Hill at Charlotte. Now, Charlotte, you might say, well, that was more of a stretch because they haven't had the kind of football success and pedigree that these other schools have already had. But we felt that the potential of Charlotte was tremendous, not only their market, but we also looked at an AD like Mike Hill and a president like Sharon Gaber and said, they're really committed. They mean it. And they've got a board that's committed, and they've got a market that can support them. So why not take a chance? And FAU, Brian White, great AD, and FAU, they joined our conference and hired Tom Herman. You can't do better than that. And Dusty May has built an incredible basketball program that we weren't really fully, aware of. So, and then you go back and you look at North Texas, and they've made huge investments. They've got some of the best facilities anywhere, and they're serious. And they played UTSA in the championship game in Conference USA. UTSA has a huge fan base now in San Antonio. It's a growing market, growing city. They're really behind, the Roadrunners, and UTSA has a commitment. They've made a commitment, and they've got a great coach. If you look at Rice, Rice has the Southeast, Western Conference pedigree. You talked about Rice a little bit, and JT Daniels is going to be their quarterback, and Rice has a very good, solid team and a good coach, and they have invested, and they're investing now. They're renovating Rice Stadium. They want to return to the years when they were relevant nationally. And so if you have administrators with that commitment, if they're willing to buy in, and they're willing to pay their coaches, we've always had great coaches who often have moved on to the so-called P5, Dan, and we've had to replace them, but we've done it. And we've done it because we pay our coaches well. Our coaches look at us as a place where, wow, I can succeed there. If I want to stay, it's a great place to be. If I want to go, I can move up to what they consider a P5 job, where maybe they make quite a bit more money and have, a little more national attention, although we get a lot. And I think that's one thing I argue. We get as much as some P5 conferences, and we've achieved as much as some P5, so-called P5 conferences, which is why I'd like to get rid of that name and just consider you're either a power conference or you're not, and we are. So anyway, that's how I viewed the realignment. And by the way, it may happen again. There may be some more coming. A lot going on, a little situation. College sports is probably not going to be free of this for decades. You're going to have more consolidation at the top. That means more ripple effects and more domino effects down below. That's just the nature of the world we live in college sports, and we have to live with it. We have to adapt to it, and we will. And our conference will have a place in the upper tier of college athletics, and that's the important part.
Here with the American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Aresco on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, and this special official move in realignment to welcome these 6 schools we've been talking about since the news broke. And I want to thank Mike Aresco and the American for letting me be right there in the moment to release all of this information and to be there at the forefront. I thank them for that tremendously now and over the years. Mike, when we look at the map, and the American Athletic Conference put this on social media, which I thought was a compelling thing to do, an exciting thing to do. When we look at your conference, we have a school in Kansas, a school in Oklahoma, 4 in Texas, 1 in Louisiana, 1 in Alabama, 2 in Florida, 2 in North Carolina, 1 in Maryland, and 1 in Pennsylvania. When you look at that map, what does that say to you?
Well, it tells me, one, we're in the right places. It also tells me that geographically we're a little more cohesive these days than some conferences that are now very, very far flung, right? That go from coast to coast, that go from north to south and pretty significant with pretty significant distances. And I look at our geography and I say, we're in the right places. We're where we belong as a conference that is going to focus on being a football powerhouse and also be good and wanting to be good in basketball and Olympic sports. Olympic sports are a function of what kind of investments you're willing to make. You know that they're not going to be revenue generators for the most part. They're not going to necessarily add to your reputational value, but it doesn't matter. You want to make sure that you have great Olympic sports for your student athletes, and we do. We have great venues for them, and part of it is football and our other support sports are responsible for the revenue, basketball, and so consequently we can spread that revenue out and sponsor Olympic sports, and you want to be good in those sports, and we've had tremendous success in many of them, but football, again, as I said, is the driver. So when you look at that map, you see that we're in the right places. And we also have a cultural affinity among the schools. I don't think there's much difference in terms of their outlooks and how they view the conference and how they view what they want to achieve in college athletics. We also have an interesting mix, Dan. We're an athletic conference, of course, but we're also tethered to education. I think it's easy for the courts and the media and the politicians these days to forget that, right? To pretend that we're just pure professionals, but we're not. We're tethered to education. We're a group of really good academic schools. We've got small private schools of outstanding quality, like Tulane and like Tulsa and like SMU, and of course the Naval Academy is one of the top institutions in the country, and of course it's more than that. It's part of our heritage. So you have that, and then you have these important regional universities that we have. And I didn't mention Rice, one of the best, schools, in the country as well. Smaller private schools, but then you have FAU and you have USF and you have East Carolina, and these are big schools, and Wichita and Memphis, and they're important schools in their regions and states. So, I think we have, Temple is a very important school in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And so consequently, there's always somebody I might leave out, but the point is, we have a really good mix of schools academically. The cultural fit is there. I think they're all competing. The key is, and I've used this term a lot, Dan, DNA, right? DNA. Mm-hmm. We've got a competitive DNA, and you have to have that. And if you don't have it, you probably don't want to be in our conference. You might want to settle for competing, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Giving your student athletes a good experience, but not necessarily wanting to be at the top level. Yeah. We found in this conference that we could do that. I thought at the very beginning we could. Now, there are some conferences that I probably wouldn't have done what I did. I wouldn't have been able to promote them in the same way or to position them in the same way. But I looked around this conference and saw former BCS schools that were willing to invest, schools that were big enough, schools that had the revenue, ultimately, schools that could appeal nationally on a TV basis. I thought we had that, and the last decade I think proved it, right? And I gave voice to their achievements. I didn't play one down. I didn't make one tackle. I didn't shoot one basket. I didn't throw one pitch, but you know, I made sure that when our teams did achieve something, that they got credit for it and that people knew about it. You
Yeah.
know, the great Glenn Tuckett, you know, former, you know, the late AD at BYU, wonderful man. He once said, you know, success unattended is a tragedy, and you have to make sure that you take care of things, and I think we have. And so now we have a sturdy foundation. Now it's a question of, can we get to the next level? You know, what's the next level? You might ask. You know, is it to be an autonomy member? Sure, that's more inside baseball, but we'd like to be part of that group because that would give us more credence as one of the top conferences in the country, which we are. I think we want to be a power conference. I don't think we need to use Power 5, Power 2, Power 6, Power 8, or whatever anymore, because I'm not even sure there is a defined Power 5, so to speak. So
Yeah.
it's better to just say we're a power conference, an elite conference. If the media continues to use Power 5 and it won't go away despite all the changes in the in the membership of those conferences, a lot of the marquee schools gravitating to the Big Ten and the SEC, that doesn't change. I mean, we could always pivot down the road. We're clearly the sixth, and often we've been the fourth or the fifth conference in terms of our achievement. I think if you look it up, we still have a winning record in football against the Pac-12 over the last decade. We have almost 70 P5 wins. You know, we're 4-4 on New Year's Day. We should have been 5-3, really. And with if it weren't for Mackenzie Milton's injury, probably could have been 6-3. You know, we've done extremely well at the highest level. We've never played a team that wasn't in the top 5 or 10 in on New Year's Day. So I just want people. I wish more of the media, and I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. I just wish more of the media would recognize, as you do, the achievements of this conference. Some do, but I think others don't because we don't have a brand. You know, that branding, that so-called P5. If suddenly we were viewed as a P6, which we should have been all along, then I think things change, right? And but you look at what this conference has achieved. The fact that 3 of our teams are going to the Big 12, the fact that the Pac-12 is talking about some of our teams, the fact that some of our other teams were in BCS conferences, doesn't that tell you what you need to know about the makeup of this conference? I think it says a lot.
Yeah. And before I let you go here, Mike, I mean, when we look at July 1st being that special day, I mean, this American Athletic Conference has been a part of it for realignment of teams, schools coming in, schools going out since its institution. You were born out of realignment when the Catholic 7 left of what was Big East football. And then Louisville and Rutgers were in with Connecticut, Cincinnati, Houston, UCF, Memphis, SMU, South Florida, and Temple. Then Louisville and Rutgers left. Then East Carolina, Tulane, and Tulsa came in. Then Navy, over 100 years of being independent in football, they come in. Then Wichita State comes in for all sports except for football because they don't have a football program. And then we see what's happening now with Houston leaving, with UCF, Cincinnati, but with UNC Charlotte, FAU, North Texas, Rice, UTSA, and UAB all coming in. So this conference has seen realignment from the beginning, and then right after, and then right after, and then an extended period of time, and then hit again, and then add again. So, I mean, you've only known realignment being the commissioner of this conference. And in the last decade, you have dealt with it in a very positive way because every time, I mean, honestly, Mike, I have to say you and your team should be given credit because like in a boxing ring, every hit that you've taken, you not only didn't fall, but you got back up and you laid another one. This is a conference that only knows the state of collegiate athletics better than most. And I again have to, give credit where credit is due and say that from the moment that you became the American Athletic Conference, it was Louisville and Rutgers, and you had to deal with them and then add and then deal with this and then add. And so, I mean, this has been a unique history of a conference, but I think, like I said to you in the beginning, when it all started, calling it the American was the right name because America only knows what it's like to be born out of having to find its own way as a country, and then to add as it goes, and to be where they are today, where we as a nation are trying to figure out how to all live together. I feel like collegiate athletics being called the American you're fitting America's destiny, America's road, America's adversity, and America's ability to get hit, but to never truly fall.
Well, that's a really good point, Dan, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I think what I'd like people to take away from what's happening now is that when I joined the Big East as commissioner, I would have hoped that the Big East could have stayed together, remained a BCS, P6 conference, whatever. Even though I don't love that nomenclature, I would prefer that it's all FBS, right? But nevertheless, we would have remained in the power, in the power spectrum. But that unfortunately wasn't in the cards. You can't control your destiny. You mentioned boxing, and I think that's an apt metaphor. You have to box from where you stand, right? You can't pretend you're at the other side of the ring or you're somewhere else. You have to punch from where you stand. But you also have to, in realignment, you're going to absorb blows, especially if you're a conference like ours, and you have to be able to withstand those, and then to try to figure out your next steps and to make sure that you come back, you come out punching. And that's what we've done. When I joined the Big East, I knew it was a fraught situation. You were hoping that it could stay together, but there were, things beyond our control. The Big East had already been hit by realignment. 2 weeks in, Notre Dame decides to leave. They played basketball and Olympic sports. And then, as you know, in November, Rutgers and Maryland went to the Big Ten, and then Louisville left to fill the place Maryland had left in the ACC, right? So we lost two key teams, Rutgers and Louisville. And then, of course, we had that sort of circus back in 2016, which wasn't easy to navigate, but we got through that. We ended up staying together. UConn then left to go back to the Big East and became independent in football. And then we had our three teams leave, the current teams, to go to the Big 12. So essentially, and there's been a lot of talk about realignment through all those years, we've essentially been the victims of our own success. If we hadn't been this successful, these teams would still be in the league. And so I'd rather see us be successful, even if we're going to lose some teams from time to time. But we became a league that unfortunately, is as good in many respects as the so-called P5, but doesn't have their revenue, and in some cases doesn't have a certain regionality, such as the Big 12 has, and the Big 10 still has to some degree, the SEC, even the ACC to some degree has it, and so consequently we know that we're potentially could be the subject of realignment, and that's just a fact that we have to accept. As I said, you can't necessarily choose your circumstances, but you have to be able to adapt to your circumstances, and that's what I think we've done, Dan. But it's more than that. We were given up for dead, I think, 10 years ago. People didn't even know whether we'd survive as a conference. People didn't view us as a real conference. We created a conference. We created a name, and I am pleased with the name. I think you're right. I think American is a great name because, one, it signifies upward mobility.
Yeah.
The opportunity. That's what we are, conference of opportunity. That's what the United States is. And that's why I think we should be given more credit than we've been given. And, you look at us and you say, okay, this is a group of challengers, and they've achieved and they've delighted their fans by doing it. We're upstarts in some ways, but we've done it. And so the name was important, but we didn't have a name. We didn't have a logo. We didn't have a TV deal. We didn't have a Madison Square Garden anymore for our tournament. I mean, how many conferences have to rebrand and lose their name? Now, we had to negotiate that, and we had to keep the revenue that was in the treasury at the Big East to get going, and to make sure that we were at least on reasonable footing, because we couldn't get the kind of TV deal we wanted. But we finally, came together, and we created a real brand, a real conference, a strong conference, a conference that's now in the middle of things nationally and is nationally relevant. I'm very proud of that. But our student athletes did it. The players who played with a chip on their shoulder and knew that they were up against tough odds, but didn't flinch and played really well. And the administrators who committed and made the investments, and the coaches who persevered and did a great job recruiting, and and the coaches who replaced the coaches who had to rebuild programs did it. So
Yeah.
I applaud all them and all of them. And I just think, Dan, appreciate also the last thing I'll say as we close is I appreciate you and some other members of the media who said at the beginning, I think this conference has a chance. It's a pretty good conference. It's not bad. And you've been interested in us. You know a lot about us, obviously. I appreciate that. I appreciate the fact that I've been able to, be on your show from time to time and talk about the conference over the years. It's been a great relationship. I appreciate that. Appreciate your friendship. But I also, I go back to the early days, and I remember playing golf with Bill Poley, and a mutual friend, invited me, and I was with Bill in the cart, and I said, Bill, I think we've got some pretty good schools, and Bill said, I think you've got some excellent schools. You could be better than the old Big East was, this new conference, and look at what this new conference achieved in football, especially, which is the sport that drives everything. But we also achieved a great deal in basketball, winning a national championship in our first year, going to the Final Four, going to the Elite Eight, multiple Sweet 16s. Women's basketball, we won all those championships when UConn was in the conference. We've had really strong Olympic sports. We've made a mark there. We don't have the resources some of those other conferences have, but we've got enough to compete. You don't have to always be chasing that last dollar. And so in the end, I appreciate the support, you and others have given us and the ability to talk to you about the conference. It's great. And I know that, we'll continue to fight where the DNA is not going to change. I'm really excited about the new schools. I really do think maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, because, it's been a transitional period, as you know. I wasn't sure, but the achievements of those schools recently really give everyone a lot of hope for the future of our conference, together with incumbent schools that have, we have a lot of new coaches. We have a lot of schools that, had tremendous success and now they're coming back, like East Carolina, like Memphis, like others. Temple with a resurgence, I think, in football over the next few years. New basketball coach. I could go on and on. Yeah. I do think the future's bright, and we'll see if I'm right. I don't know if people believed me 10 years ago. I know some of the articles. I look back at some of those articles, and it was more. I don't know whether they were patronizing or oh yeah, right. He's an optimist. This guy. He's just the eternal optimist. But I don't know that they necessarily really believe we could achieve what we did. I don't know. We'll see this time around. I hope I'm right, because it means a lot to the student athletes and the people connected to our schools, and also the fans who care about this conference. It means a lot that we continue to succeed. So thank you, Dan. Really appreciate everything you've done.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and we have rivalry, and I meant to mention Memphis, that there's a school in Tennessee as well, and some fantastic chicken barbecue. So I want to shout them out. And the Liberty Bowl is incredible. North Texas versus SMU, UAB Memphis, Rice UTSA, Charlotte East Carolina, as well as FAU South Florida, and Navy Temple. I guess that means you got to expand a little bit more to find somebody for Tulsa and Tulane. I guess.
You never know anymore. I don't want to get into that, but I'll tell you this: Memphis. People forget how successful and how important they were in football this decade. They've got their basketball back on track with Penny. But they were the rival to UCF. They did all those great things in the Liberty Bowl when they beat Ole Miss and UCLA, and they did so many great things during that decade. And I think under Ryan Silverfield, I think they're now getting back to where they were. We'll see what happens. And the Liberty Bowl renovation project they've got going is very exciting. But yeah, and that's true around our league. Everywhere you look, there's something good happening. These are a lot of great schools. We'll see how they do together. I'm optimistic.
Coming here from the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, Mike Aresco, as the conference makes history once again, fittingly on their decade anniversary here, becoming the largest that they've ever been as a conference. Like Mike said, left for dead with just a few. Temple was coming back in, UConn was there, Cincinnati, and South Florida. And now we're looking at 15 different schools involved, 13 as full-time members, Wichita State and everything but football, Navy, football only. It's become an incredible story to tell. And I always believed, because of this man on the screen and because of the terrific team that has been there, And Chuck Sullivan, I'm going to say your name because you've done an incredible job as well. And so many other people at the American spent a lot of time with Chuck. And I have to say this to Chuck. I hope you got my menu list for the American summer kickoff. With that being said, as always, Mike, thank you and congratulations on you and your team and your institutions believing in yourselves, believing in each other. And, I got to say this, thanks for making me right.
Well, I'm happy that we did, Dan, but also I'm glad you mentioned Chuck because he does a great job, and we'll make sure you have the kind of menu down in Texas. I guess we're going to transition from lobster to barbecue of some sort. But the other thing is you mentioned the office, and my staff is a great staff, and I just want all your listeners and viewers to know we've got a great staff at the American, and without them, Donna DeMarco and our COO and the staff that she leads with me on a day-to-day basis. Great group of people, and they make it happen. You don't do this alone, and they do a great job. And we're happy to be in Dallas. It's sort of the epicenter of college sports, and a great group there. Thank you, Dan. Really, always appreciate being with you. And by the way, happy 4th of July. Hope you have a great time with your family, and we'll touch base, I'm sure, afterwards. Thank you.
Happy 4th to you. And fireworks are starting a few days early for the Americans. So congratulations.
Thank you, Dan. Take care.
You too.